grab yourself a coffee and pull up a seat because today I'm teaching you how to play as the Ranger in Mythwind. I'm Mark Maya, and this is Board Game Coffee.
Vincent, get back here this instant!
Thank you. Oh, I love you too. I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, in this video we're learning how to play as the Ranger character in Mythwind. If you're interested in learning about other Mythwind characters, check out the how-to videos that I've linked in the description. There's a video for each character. And if you're looking for the core rules, we've got a link to that too. Not to mention a complete index for all the information in this video. Okay, let's jump in and learn how to explore with the Ranger. The Ranger's mission is to explore the lands surrounding Mythwind Valley, navigating its perils and collecting valuable goods for the town. But he mustn't go hastily, for proper planning and proper tools are key to success. Before we learn how to play as the Ranger, let's get to know him a little bit. Unlike other characters in Mythwind, the Ranger isn't always in town. But when he is, he's using that time to gear up for extended trips and making use of items he found on his last outing. Speaking of items, the Ranger has two main sets: his stock, which holds everything he's gathered, and his inventory, the stuff he takes with him on expeditions. And what he does take can make or break the entire excursion. The Ranger's expeditions are multi-day adventures that are influenced by the weather and packed with encounters. The Ranger receives hints of what's coming, but not exactly when it's coming. However, with the help of certain Ranger actions, he can get a look ahead at challenges to come. The setup instructions that we're going to cover in this video will focus on what you need to do to set up the Ranger for your first game. For every subsequent game that you play with the Ranger, you'll need to follow the Continue the Game section laid out in the back of the Ranger's journal. That said, let's set up the Ranger. Alright, first up, slot the two Ranger boards and the Ranger header into the Ranger tray like so. Then grab the Ranger Miniture, along with 10 coins, and your 10 Ranger skill tokens, and place them next to your tray, making sure that the skill tokens are face down like this so their levels are visible. Now place the inventory marker on the first slot of the inventory track. Next, organize your item cards by type and keep them nearby. In the stock area to the right of the character tray, you'll want to place a compass, an axe, a trap, and a rifle. The order you stack these in does not matter. Lastly, sort your expedition cards based on their tier: Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Give each tier a good shuffle and place each deck face down. And keep the expedition planning tile close by. And there you have it. The Ranger is all set and ready for adventure. Alright, now that we're all set up, let's go over a few basic Ranger concepts that separates them from the other characters. A standout feature for the Ranger is their ability to go out on expeditions. Unlike other Mythwind characters, the Ranger ventures out of town. This means that they have two distinct daytime phases. One for when they're in town, and another for when they're on an expedition. We'll go into more details about both phases later in the video. Item cards are vital to the Ranger. They represent the tools and goods that they've collected. Each item card is double-sided. One side shows a tool, and the other shows a good. In total, there are 4 distinct tool and good pairings, and one card with a tool on both sides. During expeditions, the Ranger will use these tools to acquire goods, which we'll cover later in the video. On the right side of the Ranger's character tray, you'll notice this stock area. This is where the Ranger stores all their acquired items. Now, this is very important. Because the item cards are double-sided, be extra careful not to accidentally flip them over. The item that is face up is the item that you have access to. You don't have the item depicted on the other side until something in the game allows you to turn that card over. When setting off on an expedition, the ranger selects tools from their stock to include in their inventory, making these tools accessible during the journey. Your inventory is laid out in a neat row close to your character tray. The maximum number of cards the ranger can pack in their inventory is determined by their inventory level, which is tracked here on their character tray. So at the start, you're more than likely be going out on an expedition with only 4 item cards. And that's okay, we all gotta start somewhere. As we mentioned in the video for the core rules, each day in Mythwind is separated into 3 phases: dawn, daytime, and dusk. Many of the rules for those phases have been explained in the core rules video and consists of steps that are shared between all characters. So I won't be going over those steps in this video. Instead, I'll be focusing on what the ranger character does differently during each of those phases. So let's start from the top, the dawn phase. The dawn phase for the ranger adds one additional step. Well, not so much a step as a choice. In the core rules video, we learned how to determine the weather, check season effects, and resolve weather effects. Once you're done doing that, the ranger has a choice to make: stay in town and perform one of the basic town actions, or go out on an expedition. You can indicate your choice by placing the ranger miniature on one of these 2 spaces. The choice you make now will determine what happens during the daytime phase that we're moving to next. You'll either spend your daytime phase in town or out on an expedition, not both. But here's the thing. An expedition will last multiple days. So if a new day starts and you're currently on an expedition, you have to stay on that expedition. You don't have the option to spend the day in town. Neither do you have the option to cut your expedition short. You'll have to see the expedition through till the end. Now, whichever option you choose, either stay in town or go out on an expedition, you need to know that the mechanics for each of those are very different. And the ranger can only choose one of those options at a time. Either you're in town or on an expedition. You can't be in both places at once. That said, let's learn what happens if the ranger decides to spend his daytime phase out on an expedition. I know I've mentioned this already, but I'd like to reiterate. An expedition will last multiple days. So if you started the day and your ranger is already on an expedition, then the daytime expedition option will be your only choice. You won't be able to go into town or cut your expedition short. Now that we have all that sorted out, let's learn what happens when we go out on an expedition. If the ranger character is currently on an expedition when you start your day, skip the plan expedition portion of this section and jump ahead to the reveal expedition card step. Now, if you're getting ready to play as the ranger for the first time, then you're more than likely not out on an expedition. So let's assume that's the case and continue with the lesson. First thing you're going to do when you start an expedition is choose your desired difficulty level using the expedition planning tile. This tile presents 5 different challenge levels. Each level determines the quantity and tier of expedition cards that you'll encounter. Each of these expedition cards signifies a segment of your journey. You'll take on one of these segments a day until either you've completed your journey or fall into exhaustion. The higher the difficulty you choose, the more cards you'll have to deal with. And the more cards, the longer your adventure. For your first expedition, I strongly suggest you take the light difficulty option. And when I say suggest, I mean you should definitely do that. Based on your chosen difficulty, draw the appropriate number and tier of expedition cards as indicated on the planning tile. For example, if we selected the light difficulty option, we would take 2 cards off the top of the Tier 1 deck and 1 card off the top of the Tier 2 deck. Then shuffle those cards together and lay them face down in a line near your character tray. This represents the path of your expedition. Place your Ranger miniature above the leftmost expedition card. This signifies the expedition card the Ranger is currently exploring. Now that you have your expedition cards laid out in front of you, it's time to decide which tools from your stock that you'll bring along for the trip. You can carry as many tools as you want up to your inventory limit. And according to our inventory tracker, our limit is currently set to 4. The tools you bring with you make up your inventory for the current expedition. And unless you trigger a special ability along the way that allows you to go back and grab a new item from your stock, you won't be going back to get any more tools. So choose wisely and plan carefully. Once you've selected the tools that you're taking with you, lay them out in a row below the line of expedition cards. The order you initially place these tool cards is completely up to you. But once your journey starts, you can't rearrange them unless a special game effect allows you to. Once they're lined up, each tool is assigned a numerical position that you'll determine from left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, why the order of your tool cards is so important will be explained shortly. But until then, here's a little tip. The icon on the bottom right of each face-down expedition card is a hint about the most useful tools for that segment of the expedition. Revealing an expedition card takes place whether you selected to go out on an expedition this day or if you were already on an expedition when the day started. Either way, you'll start exploring your current expedition card, the one your character is standing above, by flipping it over. Now, take a look at the weather icon in the top left corner. If the weather icon on your expedition card matches the current day's weather, you immediately trigger the effect listed on the card. For a full breakdown of how all these effects work, check out the Ranger's Effects section of the Ranger's Journal. But let me give you a quick example. If today's weather was cloudy, and the weather on the expedition card was also cloudy, then I would trigger this Rearrange effect. Rearrange allows me to swap the position of any 2 cards in my inventory. Now, you probably don't see the advantages of this just yet, but you will shortly. Alright, now that we've revealed our expedition, resolved our weather effects, and gotten our tools in order, it's time to explore. On each expedition card, you'll find a sequence of columns known as encounters. Encounters are resolved from left to right, and you must resolve each encounter completely before moving on to the next. A process we like to call exploring. And you'll only ever explore 1 card per day. You'll continue this exploration until every encounter on your current exploration card is resolved, or until the Ranger is exhausted. We'll cover how the Ranger gets exhausted a little later. For now, here's a quick rundown on how you resolve encounters. Just as with the items in your inventory, these encounters are also assigned a numerical position that you'll determine from left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that you've got all that sorted out, all you have to do is compare the cost indicated at the top of your encounter with the tool in your inventory that is sitting in the same numerical position. For example, let's say I was resolving this encounter here. Since this is the second encounter on this card, I would compare it to the second item in my inventory. If the item in my inventory matches the cost of that encounter, I resolve the outcome accordingly. But if this was the case, and the item didn't match, the encounter would still be resolved, but it would have a different outcome. The same goes for the next encounter. Since it's in the third position, I would compare it to the third item in my inventory. Once you've determined if the item in your inventory is or is not in the correct position to satisfy the cost of the encounter, resolve the listed outcome. When resolving the outcome of an encounter, first check to see if there are any preparation outcomes present. Preparation outcomes will be indicated with this icon. And if you see this icon and you're prepared, you can resolve it. Being prepared means having the right tool in your inventory that aligns with the encounter's cost, as we discussed earlier. So, in this example, the encounter requires a trap tool in position number 1 of your inventory. Since we meet that requirement, we trigger the preparation outcome listed here. In this case, the preparation outcome has awarded us with a meat good. Now, it's important to note, you don't lose the tool that earned you the preparation bonus. If you're ever wondering what any of these icons mean, there's a full index in the Ranger's Journal to help you out. Whenever you're awarded an item during an encounter, add it to the far right of your inventory. At this point, there's a good chance that you'll have more cards in your inventory than your inventory track allows, and that's okay. After you've resolved the preparation outcome, it's time to resolve the exploration outcome. First, decide whether to pay the encounter's cost or not. It's totally your call. You're not obligated to pay it even if you can. But unlike the preparation outcome, the item you use to pay for the cost of the encounter does not have to line up numerically. As long as it's anywhere in your inventory, you can use it to cover the cost of that encounter. Although in our example here, it does in fact line up, but it doesn't have to. If you pay the cost of the encounter, resolve any outcome with the paid icon. That's this green circle with the check mark in it. Now, if we were resolving, say, this encounter, you'll notice that it displays a red circle with an X in it. So in this example, if you didn't pay, you would resolve the outcome marked with the unpaid icon instead. And I'd like to point out that not paying for something isn't always a bad thing. Each encounter has a cost associated to it, usually a tool or a worker. And paying that cost is completely optional. But if you're going to pay for it, this is what you do. If the cost is a tool, you'll remove it from your inventory, return it to the supply, and resolve the effect you just paid for. But wait, there's more. If you're paying for a good that pairs with the tool you just paid with, in this example, using an axe to pay for wood, do not discard the tool. Instead, flip it over, revealing the newly gained good. By doing so, you maintain the order of your inventory, ensuring that everything stays organized for the challenges ahead. You might have noticed that some costs require a worker instead of a tool. In this case, simply select the required worker from your dice well, reduce its value by 1, and place it on the current expedition card that you're exploring. Easy peasy. However, if you don't have any workers in your dice well, then you can't pay the cost. So maybe not so easy or peasy. As a ranger out on an expedition, your day phase concludes during the end exploration step. This happens when you rest, become exhausted, or finish your expedition entirely. Let's go over each of these possibilities, starting with resting. Upon resolving the final encounter on your current expedition card, your ranger will rest. This means moving your miniature over to the next segment of the expedition. This is where the ranger will begin exploring during the next day phase. If at any point you're asked to discard a card from your inventory, but your inventory is out of cards, your ranger is officially exhausted. In the unfortunate event of exhaustion, your expedition comes to an end and is deemed a failure. Once that happens, relocate your miniature to the town space on your character tray, signifying your return. Lastly, gather all the expedition cards and shuffle them back into their respective decks. When the ranger successfully resolves the final encounter on the last expedition card, the expedition is complete. At this point, transfer all the item cards from your inventory directly into your stockpile. Then, to signify the ranger's return to safety, position the miniature on the town space of the character tray. Lastly, ensure that all expedition cards are returned to their designated decks and shuffled so they're ready for your next outing. Now, at this point of the game, after you've ended your expedition, you would move on to the Dusk Phase and do whatever needs to be done for that. But we're going to go over that a little later. Thus far, we've learned what happens if you decide to spend your daytime phase out on an expedition. So before we move on to the Dusk Phase portion of this video, we're going to see what happens if you chose the daytime in town option. And remember, when choosing to spend daytime in town or on an expedition, the ranger is only choosing one of these options. The start of the day phase begins with the ranger performing a town action as described in the core rules video. Once that's done, they'll move on to performing their specific character action. In the case of the ranger, they'll increase stock, resolve a skill, and then use items in that order. Then they'll perform their worker actions. So, since increasing stock is the first thing you need to do, let's learn about that. When it comes time to increase stock, the ranger will choose to gain one of the 6 tools indicated on their tray. As we covered in the alignment section of the core rules video, the options available to the ranger will be dependent on their alignment. If the ranger is aligned with sprites, they'll be able to collect any one of these 3 tools. If the ranger is aligned with villagers, they'll be able to collect any one of these 3 tools. Once you've selected which tool you want, take it from the supply row and add it to your stock. Once you've collected the tool you selected, move on to the resolve skill portion of your character action. In the core video, we touched a bit on how we buy skills for our characters, and we'll go over this in more detail a little later in the video. But for now, here's a brief introduction on how to resolve skills. Let's say that during the increase stock step that we just completed, I selected the axe tool. After I add the tool that I selected to my personal stockpile, I would resolve any skill that I've slotted into the space adjacent to that tool. So in this example, I would resolve this skill here that allows me to pay 1 coin to increase the value of one of my hired workers by 1. Now, if this skill slot were empty, I wouldn't have any skill to resolve. Once you've collected your tool and resolved the associated skill, if any, we move on to the use item step of the ranger action. The item you can use during this step is determined by the tool you selected during the increase stock step of the ranger action. So if I selected the axe when I was increasing stock, I'll have the option of using the item action that appears on that same row. Each of these rows has 2 options available. You can perform one of these options, both of these options, or none of these options. What each of these items do is explained in the Use Items section of the Ranger Journal. But let me walk you through one example. Let's say when I increased my stock, I selected the axe. After that, I performed the skill in the space associated with the axe. Then I moved on to these item abilities. In the case of the axe, the item associated with it is wood, which makes sense. This first area here is telling me that for every wood that I sell, I will earn 2 coins. To sell wood, just remove as much as you want to sell from your stock and return it to the supply. Then collect the amount you're owed and add it to your personal coin stash. This option here indicates that for every 2 wood I spend, meaning taking it from my stock and returning it to the supply, I can advance 1 single building on the construction queue 1 step. Which, I gotta tell you, is a very useful ability to have when you're trying to get buildings placed on the town faster. Actually, there's one more use item action that I'd like to cover. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the number of items you can take with you on an expedition is limited based on your inventory level. So if you want to take more items with you, you're going to have to increase your inventory level. But how do you do that? Well, I'm going to show you. When you select a tool from this row here, you'll gain access to this ability. This allows you to increase your inventory level by paying the cost indicated on the adjacent slot next to your current inventory level. So if I wanted to increase my inventory capacity from 4 to 5, I would pay 5 coins and 1 meat. Then advance my inventory tracker 1 slot to mark the upgrade. Alright, in the core video we learned how to hire workers. Now we're going to learn how to use them. You'll notice that next to each of your tool options, there's a slot that will hold a single worker. During the perform worker action, you can take a worker from your dice well, tick it down 1 step, and slot it into an option of the matching color. Which means your sprites can be slotted into any of these 3 spots, and your villagers can be slotted into any of these 3 spots. This will allow you to perform additional increased stock actions. So by placing my sprite worker here, I would add 1 compass to my stock. Although I won't resolve the skill token or use items associated with that action. The best part is, as long as I still have workers in my dice well, I can keep using them to collect additional tools. But I want to clarify, you can only use 1 worker per space, so you can't just pile them onto the same tool and get yourself a bunch of rifles. Alright, now at this point, whether you finished your daytime phase in town or on an expedition, the next thing you're going to do is move on to the Dusk Phase. What happens during the Dusk Phase depends on the location of your ranger. If they're in town, then they would perform the normal Dusk steps that were explained in the Mythwind How to Play video for the core rules, which includes returning your character and your workers. Now, if they're still out on an expedition, they wouldn't return their character, but they would still return their workers. The end of season phase for the Ranger has no additional steps. Just follow the steps outlined in the Mythwind How to Play video for the core rules. As highlighted in our core rules video, characters can earn skills via the lighthouse or certain in-game effects with this skill icon. To acquire a skill, the Ranger must pay its cost with coins and goods. So to pay for this skill, I would pay 1 meat and 5 coins, taking them from my personal stash and returning them to the supply. Skills come in 3 levels. To access levels 2 and 3, one of the depicted sprites must be in play. These sprites will be unlocked by certain event cards. Upon paying for a skill, flip it over to reveal its ability side, and place it into one of the slots on your character tray. When you earn a new skill token, you're free to rearrange any of the skill tokens on your character tray. But that's the only time you can rearrange your skill tokens, so place wisely. If you're looking for a breakdown of what each of the Ranger skill tokens do, there's a skill index in the back of the Ranger's journal. When you reach the end of a season, you have a few options. Do you start a new season continuing with your current character? Do you put your current character away and start up a new one? Or do you put away the entire game and come back to play another day? Well, whatever your decision, you'll find instructions on how to save your character's progress or how to continue with a new character in the back of that character's personal journal. And you can find instructions for saving and continuing your progress on the main board either in our Mythwind How to Play video or in the back of the Town Charter. And that's it. I hope this video helps and I hope you enjoy playing Mythwind. See you next week. Thanks for joining us. If you like this video and you want to see more, subscribe to our channel. It's the best way to keep up to date with everything we do here at Board Game Coffee. But if you want to see more right now, we got plenty of videos to choose from. And if that's not enough, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm Mark Maya, and this is Board Game Coffee. And remember, have fun, keep gaming, be social. See you next week.